Hello and welcome to the SRA Specific Skills Series for Language Arts. This is the writing process book D. The letter is affiliated with the grade level, so D would be your fourth grade level. You do not have to be a fourth grader to utilize these books and get the necessary skill development that is needed for continued growth. And I really suggest this particular part of the series to develop for SAT and ACT test takers to reacquaint themselves with the writing process, because sometimes these timed tests that we're taking to get into college, there are elements in these exercises that help to understand when to pinpoint that topic sentence, or how to move a sentence within a paragraph, make it less challenging. Because I notice that some of the students I tutor, some of those elements are kind of either not gone over well enough, not developed, or somewhat missing. Because the thing that most schools want to teach is making sure you understand the main idea, you're staying on topic, but pinpointing essential things like that are going to be tested in SAT and ACT. For my grade level students, you do not have to be a fourth grader to go through this book. I've used these books for middle schoolers and high schoolers, as I've said in the other videos I've taken for the other books in this series. But the first thing I want to get out of the way is that these videos are meant for educational purposes only. If you're planning on printing these out and you want to utilize the multiple choice options to save on paper or whatever the case may be, I say use sheet protectors. So if you're going to print it out, you can at least utilize a sheet protector and dry erase markers and vis-a-vis markers, Lysol wipes and Windex and paper towels, just to be able to clean the surface for use. And also, it does make it a little less strenuous when it comes to learning the way in which these lessons in this particular book are going to be taught, because you're going to get excerpts or paragraphs or little letters, things that are already written. So it would help to have a printed version in the ability to use dry erase markers and things like that to get used to underlining or writing the punctuation marks where they need to be, and also the proofreader marks that are going to be necessary to use in correcting some of the paragraphs they're going to provide you in these exercises. I do want to stress that to get the benefit of this particular resource, handwriting is always the best in most cases, but for this particular book, I would say that when you get to the proofreader mark section, or when you're being asked to identify the proper way or the correct way of writing the sentence after reading proofreader marks and things like that, in those moments it's essential to be able to write everything out with those mistakes corrected, just to see if the students are actually developing the skill in reading the proofreader marks correctly. And this is taught at the fourth grade level, and actually third grade level too. I don't have the third grade one, but proofreader marks are taught in elementary school, and they get a little bit more intense as you go through middle and high school when you start learning the more advanced things. And I would think that identifying the proofreader marks in this series is probably the most could be the most stressful if you're not familiar with how to write them. So for this, the handwriting component would be most appropriate when you're being asked to write them, to correct an incorrect sentence using proofreader marks, as well as the reverse of that, which is writing the sentence correctly when being presented with proofreader marks and editing a written form. So the processes that they're going to show you in this book are going to be key to developing that. And of course, as I always say with my other books, this is going to be one of those things where if you are going to be taking advantage, full advantage of these books, you can create a little booklet with the notes, because within each unit, at the beginning of each unit, at the top of the page is a box that's going to contain the rules or the guidelines that are to be used to understand how to write appropriately. So you can write down those notes, create a little booklet, use some, hole punching and some yarn or twine or whatever it is, and create those little books to review as you are developing your writing skills. And also, I should say that in this particular book, since there is going to be a lot of rewriting or writing things correctly or learning to write proofreader marks, try to make it more entertaining. So I've been saying use construction paper and markers and things like that. For this, you probably want to use tools such as identifying a certain color and make it associated with a certain thing. So if you're going to be using, for example, red could be used for maybe underlining titles, since you don't have access to, if you're writing it down, underlining is the process used for handwritten identification of italicizing titles. So that would be helpful. Or any time that you're going to be using punctuation. So if you're in any way, shape, or form fixing punctuation, that could be a different color, like green. Anything that's related to grammar could be orange. So if you're fixing spelling or past tense verb for present tense verb, anytime you're dealing with the proper structure of a sentence to get that idea out, you want to use a color for that. So those suggestions would be helpful to use so you can review that later. And of course, make a little key for that so that you can remember that, because if you are going to use a booklet to refresh yourself, you want to know what red represents for that unit. Blue, green, whatever colors you're planning on using. All right, so the most important part of this book is the to the teacher and to the student sections. Always make sure to read that. And if you haven't had the opportunity to watch the video regarding the introductory to the specific skill series, I suggest you do that. I do mention the to the teacher and to the student frequently because it's going to give you pertinent information for this particular series. I will be stopping on the to the student page, but I'm only going to be spending 5 to 6 seconds per page to give you an opportunity to pause the video and answer the questions. So you don't necessarily have to use paper and pencil or pen, however you're using it. You can be creative and use construction paper, things like that. But just know that the answer key that's provided at the end of this video, everything is going to be, if it's multiple choice, the letter that you're choosing your answer to, you need to be writing that down in addition to the answer itself. Because like I said, you want to be handwriting the information down as much as possible. So without further ado, I will continue on. This is to the student page. What I like about this is it gives you an outline of what's happening in the book. So this is a snapshot of what the book is going to be covering. It's going to give you some of the manners in which you can organize your writing. So here's an example. So it kind of walks you through the stages of writing just a little bit at a time, and it shows you how information will be presented. So in the rule box, if you're supposed to be learning this particular proofreader mark and then writing above it, so it's going to teach you those key skill sets that you're going to need to master it. And of course, the most important part is down at the bottom. This is like in every classroom that you're going to find. The teacher is going to have the learning goal or the learning objective for that day. this is the learning goal for this book. So this is going to tell you what you're expected to master, understand, or continue to develop as you move on and move forward. And I highly suggest going onto Google and looking up some of these things. If you skip all the way to the end of the video and look at the answer key, each unit has a subset skill set related to it. As I mentioned before, there's 12 units in this book. So this outline, like I mentioned before, it says getting ideas, but that's not the topic of every unit, but it is a component to the writing process. So this represents the writing process, and within each one there are components that are identified with getting ideas, planning, drafting, revising, editing, proofreading, and publishing. So if you're going to be familiar with each of those steps, I'd say skip to the end if you want to kind of set yourself up and prepare for the lessons and know what's going to be occurring. But also that will help you to identify if you need extra practice. If you look at the answer key and you're not hitting the right answers, or you're not quite grasping the lesson for that particular unit, then you can Google that particular aspect of getting ideas and utilize more practice. And you can even, this is considered fourth grade, look at some third grade, and you can literally Google getting ideas and whatever the topic might be for within getting ideas. So you might be learning about narrative essays. You can say, okay, I don't understand narrative essays. You can say narrative essays, grade 3 practice or exercises, and you can just find other things. And I know that teachers are really good about providing those digital resources that you can use. Use that. Khan Academy has things, I'm sure. I believe that there's a couple more sites that many teachers that I've heard have been kind of juggling. Edmodo is one that I've heard of, but I'm not that familiar with it. But if you get a chance, I know that students have access to many resources, and this is mostly geared towards parents who are in this COVID-19 situation, who are putting on this extra hat of being the teacher too. So without further ado, I will not be talking any further, 5 to 6 seconds per page until we get to the answer key, and then I'll be hitting the highlights there too. And this is a scope and sequence of the writing process. So it tells you from A to H. I only have D, E, and F, what each unit's going to be covering. But like I said, the answer key, which I will be showing you in a second, is going to have more detailed information for each unit. Okay, so unit 1, getting ideas, is only going to be one unit, and then planning, and then there's going to be a language activity page. So this is going to go in chronological order. All right, so I'm going to zoom in so that you can get the answers for the different sections. And there you can get the last lap. So this is zoomed in enough where you could stop at those different stages to find the answers for the first, second, third laps. But the last lap is obviously going to be more intense because you're dealing with the publishing and proofreading sections. But as I was saying before, so each one, you're having more information on how many units are going to be covering one of those areas that were presented in the overview section of To the Student. Other than that, that concludes the video. Go to Casey Kite on YouTube if you want to look at other videos within this series that I've posted. I don't have all of them. If I had them, I would definitely put them up, just so that you have access. But just know that don't let the book letter D, which is 4th grade, pigeonhole you into thinking that only 4th graders need this information. I've had plenty of middle and high school students and even SAT and ACT students go through these books from D, E, and F. Had them go through all 3 of them just to make sure they understood how the writing process works and to be able to identify it in a piece of work, because you're given writing samples in the SAT and ACT and you're expected to perform these elements. So this would be helpful to reinforce or to go back and just have that extra practice that's outside of the SAT and ACT practice books. And I also want to make sure that I noticed that they have the different thinking maps. So they don't properly identify the titles of the thinking maps the way that they're taught in school. So I would suggest possibly going on Google and looking up the different Google Maps that are directly related to with the different types of writing, the narrative, the personal, the persuasive, those types of writing styles. You can look up thinking maps that are helpful for those, because in school students are taught which types of format is most conducive to the type of writing you're going to be doing. So if you're going to be comparing books, comparing, contrasting, 2 different books all together, you're going to be using more of an expository writing style just to show, compare and contrast between the 2 things. It's not that one is better than the other, but many teachers will ask a student after they've read 2 different books to write an essay comparing them and contrasting them. So knowing which bubble map to use or which type of brainstorming tool works best. Webbing is done quite often in this particular book, but that's not always necessarily the case. Using Venn diagrams is helpful for comparing and contrasting, but when you're going to sit down and work out the way you're going to organize the comparing and contrasting elements, it would be helpful to use a flow map, and each flow box can represent a paragraph. And then that way you can, I'm just using an example of how I've seen it done. And then once you pare down from the brain mapping and you figure out what you're going to do in your writing, how you're going to organize everything, the flow map will help to structure even further. And that's not provided here, but you can Google what a flow map is and utilize that to really enhance this particular skill, and also it will help to scale it up. So if you have more advanced writers, someone who's grasping, a student that is grasping this a lot faster at a quicker speed, they're a writer at heart, then you can make it a little bit more rigorous for them to make sure that when they're writing that they're still following the same processes and same habits, because as you get into college and writing becomes a little bit more challenging, sticking to the roots of your writing and the habits that you form as you develop your writing skills is very key in providing successful papers at the college level. And that is the end of the video.